Uh, Now I'm going to give my presentation on research paper. My title was Stress Coping Strategies and Gender Differences in a Private University in Thailand. This was a research project in partial fulfillment of the requirement for the course ENGL 446 Cross-Cultural Communication. I'm Xiong. Here comes my abstract. This study examined stress coping strategies and gender differences at AIU. My sample included 18 male students, 20 female students, and 2 students from the LGBTQ group. The cross-sectional survey design was adopted to conduct the quantitative research, and both descriptive statistics like mean and standard deviation, inferential statistics like t-test were used to analyze my data. Results of the analysis showed a slight difference between the female students and male students. Male students reported negative coping strategies like taking alcohol and drug use. For further suggestions, specific courses about psychological counseling or workshops to teach stress coping strategies should be offered by universities. Now let's move to next section, which is introduction. We know psychological problems occur at every stage of life, especially for our college students. We are between the stage of the immature children and adults, so the psychological crisis will be more prominent at this stage. Getting closer to graduation, we college students feel more and more serious pressure from study to the employment. And these negative emotions can range from refusal to communicate with others, or the low self-evaluation and constant restlessness, to depression and even self-harm. Most of the time, it may be difficult for us to overcome difficulties by our own strengths, but so we need to seek coping strategies for stress. While there has been a great deal of research on psychological stress and associated factors in college students, few researchers take the initiative to study stress coping strategies adopted by both male and female students. So this research paper aims to examine stress coping strategies and gender differences at AIU. So the thesis statement is to find that gender differences exist in stress coping strategies among college students. Let's move to the review of literature. According to Sala, she said stress in a broad sense relates to all aspects of life, including psychological problems. And for the common stressors in college, it includes academic performances, interpersonal relationships, like with your roommate or with teacher. Financial burdens and appearance may be the source of their anxiety. Gender differences in perceived level of stress. It said girls generally experience more psychological distress, anxiety, and depression than boys. And for some other previous studies, there were no significant gender differences in stress coping strategies. So I want to find, because the previous studies was conducted in 2000, so I'm not sure for now can I find the significant gender differences. So here comes the methodology part. So as I already talked before, my sample includes 18 male students, 20 female students, and 2 students from the LGBTQ group. So the study was conducted in at AIU, and quantitative research was adopted through the cross-sectional survey design. And the adopted questionnaire contained 14 items that offered different ways to cope with stress on a 5-point frequencies scale. Mean, standard deviation, and t-tests were used to detect gender differences for stress coping strategies. And 40 students at AIU were picked randomly to be my participants. Once the survey opened online, college students were allowed to fill it in around 2 to 10 minutes, and the data was collected over a period of 3 days. Okay, let's move to part 4, results. I just picked 3 of my significant results, so we can see from this diagram. Highlight 1. There were significant gender differences in 2 stress coping strategies. For example, insulting each other, taking alcohol, and drug use. I used t-tests to examine the gender differences, and for these 2 sections, the p was less than 0.05. So we could see here. For the p for the insulting others are only 0.02, and the next one is 0.04. And highlight 2, all students have higher mean scores in staying by self, and males score the mean was 3.89, and the standard deviation was 0.76. And for female students, the mean was 4.10. The standard deviation was 0.97. And watching TV playing on the computer, male scores mean was 3.72 and standard deviation was 0.96, and female scores mean was 3.45 and standard deviation was 1 point. And the final one shows all participants, including the LGBTQ groups, scored low in the section on going for disco, this one. Male scores mean was 1.61 and standard deviation was 1.04. The female scores mean equals to 1.40 and standard deviation was 0.68, and the LGBTQ scores mean was 2.0 and standard deviation was 0. So the discussion, let us see the implications of the research. In the traditional view of the masculinity, women are tender, emotional, and focused on the spiritual level. It's like we are so sensitive and we love crying. We love to cry. Meanwhile, men are supposed to be assertive, tough, and focused on material success. However, there was no significant gender differences in choosing to cry to let feelings out when stressed. The p-value from the t-test showed it was more than 0.05, so which means there was no significant gender differences. We can see here. Crying to let feelings out. The p-value was only 0.18, so it is bigger than the 0.05. We should see things in multiple perspectives. For example, the result in the study that students hardly went to the disco to relax may be due to the religious climate of the university at AIU. And moreover, gender roles changes as time goes by. Male and females thought habits and thinking habits and behavior patterns may converge or change in some cases as well. So we cannot see things from only one perspective. Okay, so here comes to the final one, the conclusion part. So we already know that there was no significant differences between the male students and female students, but for the male students, they prefer to like seeking for alcohol or drug use to release their stress. And all of the students, they rarely go for disco. And suggestions for universities are offering specific courses about psychological counseling or workshops to teach stress coping strategies at the beginning of the semester. And the biggest limitation of this study was the lack of perceived stress levels of students. I mean, I should build a connection, maybe two survey. The first one is to examine their perceived level of stress, and the second one was about the stress coping strategies. So it would be more efficient. Besides that, for the studies should consider LGBTQ groups when examining gender differences. Remember, for my sample, I only have 2 students from the LGBTQ groups, and sample size should be larger and more representative. Like, or we can only choose people from the senior or junior, the undergraduate students, something like that. So that's all for my research. Thank you for your listening.